your time is your knowledge, and that's the value that we're giving to the projects and the clients. So there is that aspect of how many hours do you work, what can you do within these hours, and you've really got to be realistic. If a client turns around and says, oh, can you make all these maps and all these applications and code all this within a day, you really have to know your skill and say, actually, we can do something like that, but we need a bit more time. You've really got to understand if it's going to take you a little bit longer.
Welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping Podcast. My name is Daniel, and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. In just a minute, you're going to hear a conversation between myself and Sophie Willett. Sophie is an early stage geospatial professional. She's been working as a consultant for the last year and a half. This podcast episode today is part of a small series of episodes that I want to publish that's going to focus on geospatial students and early stage professionals. And the inspiration for wanting to create this small series of podcast episodes came from the insight that we oftentimes talk about the future of geospatial in terms of technology and data and that kind of thing, but we very rarely take the time to talk with the future of geospatial, which is, of course, these students, these early stage professionals. So the hope is that by sharing these episodes, perhaps they'll provide a reference for other early stage professionals. Perhaps they'll answer some of the questions that students might have about the geospatial industry, what that first job looks like. And if you're a more senior geospatial professional, if you've been in the industry for a while, perhaps this will be a reminder of what it was like that time you were just starting out. Maybe you'll remember that one person that really made a difference in your career, and perhaps you'll be inspired to be that one person for someone else. So just before we get started today, I want to say a big thank you to my sponsor, SafeGraph. So SafeGraph are geospatial enthusiasts just like us. They curate points of interest data, building footprint data, and foot traffic data. So you can do a whole bunch of interesting things with data like this. You can do a competitive landscape analysis if that's something you're interested in. You might be looking at determining how many visitors came to a specific building, or perhaps mapping population movement. Or maybe you have a completely different use case or analysis in mind. If you know that you need points of interest data, if you're looking for this kind of data for the US, Canada, or the UK, definitely check out SafeGraph. And if you want to know a little bit more about SafeGraph, if you want to go a little bit more in depth with how this data is collected, check out episode 38. SafeGraph have actually been on the podcast before. If you go back through the archives and look for an episode called Building Geospatial Truth Sets, you'll find out a lot more about the company, what they do, and perhaps how you can work together with them. Hi Sophie, welcome to the podcast. Would you mind just introducing yourself to the audience? Perhaps explain where you are in terms of your geospatial career right now and a little bit about how you got there.
Hi, yeah. Well, thank you for having me, Daniel. So at the moment, I'm a graduate geospatial consultant. So I work at the moment in a company called Arcadis, who are a design and engineering company. So within the engineering sector, I work for highways and infrastructure. But before that, I actually studied natural sciences at university. So a little bit more unconventional than a lot of my colleagues who perhaps did geography or geology. And then I focused down into remote sensing at university in my dissertation, and then decided to do a master's in GIS. So not quite the direct route that I was expecting from natural sciences, but that's where I'm at the moment.
When you say a master's in GIS, was that like with a just total focus on GIS as a specialization, or was it GIS within some other form of specialization, perhaps an environmental issue, for example?
So the master's itself was purely GIS, so geographical information systems. And what we did within just a year, we focused on cartography. We had a module on Python scripting. We had a module on mobile GIS. So they really wanted to give us a taste of all the different aspects of GIS. And then I know, for example, so I've gone into the consultancy. I have a friend from the masters who's gone into PhD in research. So it really did just give us a taste of what GIS can be, and then we sort of molded it to what we wanted.
That's really interesting, because a lot of people talk about GIS as not being a profession in itself. It's like a toolkit that we use and we apply to different sort of industries, if you will. But it sounds like this was a real focus on GIS as a profession.
If you were to probably ask my lecturers, we were all within the geography and geology building, but I think there was quite a distinction that people do use GIS, the geospatial skills, a geographer might use it just to do a map or do some sort of analysis. But there was a real focus to have people who had the fingers in all the pies of GIS or geospatial. They really wanted us to be skilled in being able to adapt quickly to the world of analytics and have a little bit of skill in it, and being able to develop and flourish in perhaps something, whether it's remote sensing or the cartography side of it. I think the lecturers, and I found a lot of the people doing it, wanted, like you said, it's a toolkit, but if you have that toolkit, your flexibility and ability to pick up the skills quickly and apply them to a range of projects makes you different from perhaps just a geographer who has the knowledge of the earth, of the people on the earth, and it's developing that skill to be adaptable. I think that's why I really like the GIS master's idea, because I thought, well, actually this is gonna teach me a range of things, and the opportunities in the future are endless. I could go into anything I wanted to, and that's really why I chose it as a master's rather than going straight into employment after studying natural sciences.
Okay, so you've got this GIS Masters, and you mentioned earlier on that you're working as a geospatial consultant. Can you give us an idea of what your day-to-day looks like when you're working as a geospatial consultant?
Yeah, of course. So, day-to-day, I would say it's depending on the project you're on. So projects can be a week, they could be half a year, they could be up to 2 years. I know some people are on, but my day-to-day at the moment, I'm focusing more on mobile GIS, so using Survey 123. I've been supporting the technical side in terms of creating the surveys, getting those out on site, getting the engineers and the inspectors to use them, and then also almost full circling it and then collecting the data they've gone out to site to collect and putting it onto a dashboard, putting it onto some sort of web app for then the analysis to be done by the engineers. So that's my everyday at the moment. When you start with a project, you think, okay, well, I need to do this, that, and the other, A, B, C. But actually, when it comes to the skills of that, you don't have to do it in that order. As long as the deliverable and the end result is the same, you can focus a bit more on, say, the report making, or put some more time into the automated coding. And it's that flexibility that I really enjoy. So every day is not the same, and I have different meetings every day, and you can be on different projects. And it's that consultancy of you can be applied on quite a range of projects and get the job done. How you do it is up to you, or up to how your team wants to do it, or how the project manager wants to do it. And then you're able to present this end result, and you go, this is going to help this project hugely. I don't know how some projects don't use mapping, or they don't use geospatial analysis, and they've just been looking at Excels, and I go, this is really going to change the game.
So you mentioned that you're working on lots of different projects there. Is there crossover between those projects that you're working on in terms of expert subject knowledge, or are they all completely unrelated?
I'm a bit of both, really. I find that last year I worked fully on all my time was on Survey 123 and mobile GIS, and I found that since doing that, almost naturally my skill in that has developed, and I can support other teammates in their careers with Survey 123 and how to really get the most out of that on other projects. So I think you can naturally become, I wouldn't use the word expert, but you would naturally become well known for understanding the techniques and the technology behind it. But at the same time, I think as a graduate and within the company, I'm able to say to my line manager, you know what, I really do fancy doing, for example, I've said a bit more remote sensing, or I really want to develop my skill in Python coding and automating, or a bit of FME. And they're able to accommodate what you would like to learn, and if there's any training you need to do. So it really depends how you want to approach it. If you want to become a specialist in just this small part of the umbrella of geospatial and GIS, or if you want to keep your skills broad and your toolkit as full as you like.
So thank you very much for sharing that with us. It sounds like you've got an incredibly flexible workplace. I guess what I was trying to get at before, though, is that expert subject knowledge in terms of the domains that where you're applying Survey 123, for example. Is it all building sites? Is it transport, for example, or something different? Is there any crossover between those application areas?
So within the company that I work for and the team we're in, we're mainly highways, and we do a lot of rail work and the infrastructure there. So for example, in the past, Survey 123, I've worked with a client who is the river waterways, and they use the Survey 123 surveys. They use them for just asset inspections. So I can use that knowledge of, okay, well, these inspections, they will want photos, they want to be able to add a load of text, they want their location to be collected, and apply that to perhaps a slightly different assignment, for example, risk analysis, or if the inspectors want to go out and analyse, I don't know, pavements or some sort of council work, that there's always slightly bit of a crossover. And I think sometimes the way it's approached can be similar. So you've got the same building blocks of, okay, how do I create a survey? How, in terms of mobile GIS, how is the user going to use it? And it all adds on top of each other, but not necessarily the same topic or the same assignment or project. There can be different clients, you'll be working with a slightly different team. They will sometimes want a slightly different outcome. So whether they want, is it a dashboard? Do they want a web map? Do they want reports to be generated? Do they want it within a geodatabase so that they can just extract it and stick it in a model? It really does vary depending on quite a few different aspects.
That all makes perfect sense to me. So you had this formal education in geospatial, a master's in GIS, and you mentioned topics like Python, mobile data collection, and remote sensing, and it sounds like you're working actively with some of those in your current role. How well do you think that master's in GIS has prepared you for the tasks that you're asked to perform today?
I would say I would struggle if I hadn't done the master's in with the work I'm doing now. I think I know a lot of people who don't have the masters in GIS. Perhaps they did geography, or they've played around a little bit with coding, and that definitely gives you a head start. I think what the masters did was provide the opportunity for me to explore these different techniques and topics and themes, and almost work out, okay, I never thought I would enjoy coding. I always thought computer science, that's not me. I like a bit of maths, but actually in my everyday work, that's what I try and bring into the project. I try and bring some sort of coding and automation to give the project the advantage and hopefully make things easier for people. And I think that's what the master did. It allowed me to explore and just try new things. And it like I said, we had a module which was cartography, and then we had coding, and then we just had some simple geoanalytics. And it was having a month or so and a module to experiment and to provide deliverables on those topics. I was able to go, now I can go, okay, well, I did that in my master's. I wasn't great at it, maybe I'd need a bit more training, and it was having that sort of exposure to them over the year for me to say, oh, I can say to my line manager, I know how to do that, or I've had some experience in that. And it just starts the conversation of whether you either want to explore what that means for work now, and whether you want to be popped on that project, or if you don't. And there are quite a few topics I could go, well, actually, I don't fancy doing that for this project. Is there something else I can work on? Or if I compromise and we do this project, can I then focus a bit more training and do some personal development in this other topic like remote sensing, or that can lead on to sustainability? So yeah.
It sounds like you're doing a really good job of being proactive and taking charge of your own learning, I guess, and the experiences you want to have and gain while you're working. Is that difficult to do? Because I think when you've just started out in an organization, you might feel like you're coming across as being very demanding or perhaps entitled. How do you not feel like that? Or what makes it easier for you to have these conversations with your line manager?
I think, well, to start with, you have to have quite an open relationship with your line manager. My line manager, she's fantastic. She's really got my back in anything I want to do. And I agree, when you start out in full-time employment after university, you feel like perhaps you can't ask questions, you can't give your preference or your priority on some sort of project or the work you want to do. But I find that as long as you approach it respectfully and say, well, I've had experience in this and I know it's not really my cup of tea, I think most employers will listen to that. And I think that's something, in terms of when I was looking for a job, I wanted a people focused company. I hadn't worked in an office before the job I'm in now, and it's something that I was conscious of, that I could just become someone in a suit who rocks up 9, finishes work at 5:30, goes home. But I really wanted to enjoy work, and I think that's why I actively put a lot of effort into my personal development. And that's something that the company I work for, Arcadis, they're really keen for you to do, because they don't want you to be bored. They want you to excel in what you're good at. And until you find that's why I try and ask for different opportunities, and you've got to seek that out, because at the end of the day, that's your responsibility. And I don't want to be here in 5 years' time with no progress and saying, well, I've got nothing to prove for the last 5 years. There's no harm in asking, really.
I really admire that approach. I think it's, it's proactive, and it's going to ensure that you get the experiences that you want to have. I think it's really, really clever, but not particularly easy to do. So hats off to you. So this is your first job, I believe. How did you get the job? What did the process look like for you for applying for this job?
Oh gosh, it was stressful and difficult, and I think anyone that says otherwise is lying. I think it took me a lot of time to get over the first thing I found is when I was rejected from jobs, because I applied to probably half a dozen to a dozen, and I really took the rejection quite personally. And so I stepped back and thought, well, I need to make this application every single time personal to the company I was applying for. I made sure that I covered their values. Most companies on their websites will have their values, their goals, and really almost tick box that. Say, well, have I mentioned that? If I have an interview, do I bring this up and prove, for example, why I'm driven in sustainability, or I'm people driven, or I really focus on what the client wants? And you really have to mold yourself to what they're looking for, because at the end of the day, I'm sure companies get such a huge range of applicants, and it can be so disheartening when you don't even get to the interview stage. But I was lucky enough with Arcadis, I got through to the assessment stage, and I fully think it was the assessment and not my interview or my application that allowed me to get the job where I am. Because with the assessment day, so we travelled down to London, there's quite a few of us, and they gave us a task of building something with Lego, working together. But actually I realised what they're looking for is how you interact with everyone, whether you go and talk to the assessors at lunchtime, whether you are just an open-minded person. So that's what I really tried to focus on. You've got to work for the company you're going to apply for. You've got to really prove yourself to them, not necessarily the qualifications, because at the end of the day, if you get past the questions in the interview stage, they know you're qualified. They want to know who you are, and the proof is in the pudding. That hopefully that's where I was able to succeed, by just proving that I was the sort of person, hopefully, that you would want on a team, and vice versa. You're also assessing whether the people in your assessment day and in the interview are they people you want to work with. So you can still be slightly fussy, and you can come away and go, actually, that's not really the environment I want to work in. But luckily for me, the one with Arcadis worked really well.
I think that's really amazing that you could see that you could see what they were actually looking for here. We're not, who cares whether you finish the project or not with the Lego, right? That this has no impact for them. There's no benefit for them if you finish building the Lego or not. It's how you work as a team. And then you started thinking, like, other thoughts around that, like, okay, not just how we work as a team, how do we interact with them? Do we come up to them at lunchtime? Do we ask questions? Because that's going to be a big part of your working life. I think that was brilliant and a really amazing insight that you had there. So a lot of people, I think, when they go to some of these assessment days or a part of an application process, they might feel like the traffic is all one way, right? People are asking them questions and they're responding. You sound like the kind of person who perhaps flipped that a little bit on its head and started asking questions of the people involved in the application process of the business. If that's the case, could you give us an idea of some of the questions you wanted answers to?
Yeah, so I remember my assessment day quite clearly, and the interview was with someone I now work with. He's in my team, and I remember going to the interview so there was the assessment day was a few interviews, and then a group activity, like I said, and then just a lunchtime. And with the interviews, they asked me, what sort of work do you want to go into? Where do you see yourself in, 5 years' time? What is GIS? They asked the pretty standard questions. I think if you were making up an interview for Geospatial, you'd go, okay, what do I need to know about this person? And what I asked them, I'd like to think formed quite just a not an informal. You just have to come across as quite relaxed and not too stressed out. It's obviously a completely stressful situation, and I'm someone who gets rather anxious before, but actually if you relax yourself, the interviewer will be relaxed as well. And what I asked them was, what does your day look like? What is something that I can expect to be working on? So can you give me some examples? Because those are things that I really did want to know. I wanted to know, if I got this job in a month's time, what would I be doing? Where are the locations of the clients? Do you meet the clients often? And it was questions that perhaps on the job description they would say, oh, it's quite vague, you'll be working on these sorts of projects. What can you give me an example? And I really actually found, when you ask specific questions like, can you give me an example of a project I might work on, or how many other graduates are there, what's the team like, they showed how passionate they were about the job as well. And I think maybe it's perhaps would be different if you were interviewed by someone who was just in the recruitment team. But because within this GIS team we were interviewed and the assessors were part of the team themselves, you really got an idea of what the team was like. And it was trying to establish if I would fit quite well into that, really.
So earlier on, we talked about some of your hard skills. We mentioned this mobile data collection, Python, remote sensing again. So these are a lot of the skills that you had the opportunity to learn and develop during your master's. And I'm sure you thought, or maybe you still think of them as being key skills, but now that you've been out at work, in a working environment for the last year and a half, what do you think your key skills are today?
I think that's a good question. I think technical skills, I think what really changes the game and levels up how other engineering teams see GIS is the automation side, the data management. But in terms of, I think, quote, is soft skills, which I think are almost just important, if not more important. On the job, I've learned to be as open-minded and as flexible as possible. You really have to learn on the job. Geospatial work and the GIS topics that I cover a huge amount of skill types. And you've really got to be able to not necessarily bounce around from one skill to the other, but sit down, refocus your mind. I always joke that if I start doing some coding, I can code in Python and R, but if I haven't done it for a couple of weeks, it almost looks like a foreign language to me. And once I've got a task where I have to use that sort of language, I almost have to retrain my brain. You've got to rewire it, just as the same as if you had a cartographic topic or a project, and then you quickly flip and you're on some sort of FME or data automation. You really have to be able to quickly rewire your brain to go, okay, change gear, let me think about this in a slightly different way, and as well as to consider why you want to why you're doing this skill, why you're doing this sort of topic or the technique. You've got to think, what's the end result? And it's having that sort of learn on the job. You can go anywhere. Not the toolkit is there. You've just got to be able to quickly pick and choose which skills you want to develop. And I think, having worked in an office, and I've worked at Arcadis for almost, just coming up to a year and a half now, it's that people skills. I think GIS and geospatial is still something, it's not part of the discussion at the start of a project. And you've really got to build that relationship to help people understand what it is, really, what GIS even stands for. There are so many acronyms, and also why it's good for their project and why it's going to help them. So you really have to have those, like I said, soft skills, but to bring yourself and the skill set and GIS to the forefront of people's mind, to say, this is worth your time. Let me do this for you.
So are you also involved in the selling in of, your skills to these different projects, or are you like a resource that they already know that they need? Because I think there are two different things there. If they already know that they need someone like you who can do the things that you can do, if you're a project manager, you take down these things from the shelf. Okay, these are the default things we need to do this project. They take them down, plop them into the project. But if they don't know, then sometimes you have to go out and actively sell your skills, which is, I think, what you were getting at just before. Are you actively involved in that selling in of, these are the things I can do to help you get to where you're trying to go?
So my primary job is, I'm a resource. At the beginning of each project, they work out, okay, we need we need some sort of GIS consultant, and from the team I might be selected, or someone slightly senior. I'm still just a graduate at the end of the day. However, I think what I'm witnessing within my team and with the work of technical directors and senior and principal consultants in GIS is there is more opportunities out there than we're working on. We have a slew of work and projects and infrastructure work which know they need GIS, but there are also so many clients and team leaders and project managers and business directors who don't necessarily know what they're missing. And I think I'm trying to get more involved in that sort of the internal initiative of making GIS a topic of conversation, because I think what is quite perhaps a small task to us can really change and help the project. So an example I can think of is I was in a meeting and someone said, oh, it would be really great if we could map this data or just have a look at it. And we went away and said, well, that's quite simple. You have point data, we'll pop it on a map, maybe give him a dashboard, some sort of approval process, do the symbology. And you'd be surprised by how little people think of the symbology and mapping when they look at data. And that really allowed people visually to view the data and go, oh gosh, whether we have a problem there, or that's something that we've not thought of because we've not seen it in this sort of way before. And I think there is an aspect still to GIS and geospatial work where we have to sell it, not necessarily for monetary value, but you have to sell why it's worth the time and the effort to hire geospatial and GIS consultants to get involved, because they don't know. I know a lot of engineers, they have their way of working and they don't necessarily know what they're missing. And I think that's part of the job. I explain what my job is every single time I say to someone new, oh, I'm a geospatial consultant. They go, what on earth does that mean? And you've got to start from the ground up. And I think there are people still in my industry, and I think geospatial can be applied to every single industry as long as there's any sort of data, spatial, and you can have temporal data, and you can really make the most of it. And I think we've still got to, as a GIS and geospatial professionals, it's our job to sell it to everyone who doesn't know what it means and what it can do for them. I think I'm in that position where I'm luckily able to be resourced, but I also want to actively within the future work with the team to say, let's make it part of the conversation from the very, very start, because GIS really has the potential.
I really like your approach there. It sounds like you're acting as an ambassador for yourself and for the industry. And I think that's a really, really, really clever thing to do. So I notice in your title there, it's geospatial consultant. And sometimes when we see consultant in a title, there's this expectation of billable hours. So you charge for the amount of hours that you work. Is that something that you've experienced in your job?
Yeah, so I've had a small bit of experience in terms of project managing and managing my time, and I think consultancy, and that's just the nature of the environment that I work in and the team works in. You do have to bill your time, because your time is your knowledge, and that's the value that we're giving to the projects and the clients. So there is that aspect of how many hours do you work, what can you do within these hours, and you've really got to be realistic. If a client turns around and says, oh, can you make all these maps and all these applications and code all this within a day, you really have to know your skill and say, actually, we can do something like that, but we need a bit more time. You've really got to understand if it's going to take you a little bit longer, if the client's being reasonable. And if you can't say yes to everyone, you really have to understand where you draw the line and go, let's sit these people down and say, this is what we can do for you, but we need to be paid. At the end of the day, my salary isn't calculated off my billables. It's not like recruiting or anything within that sort of sector. But there is a lot of effort done by people slightly higher than me in what are they going to be working on in this time? How long is it going to take myself or a colleague to do this? And is this reasonable? Are we asking too much, or can they be pushed a little further in terms of skill? Do they need a bit more training in this? So there's the flexibility, but at the end of the day, it's still a business and you've still got to make money.
I completely understand the business side of it. I understand why people do it. I just think when we first start out in the industry and it's the first time that we have to be on the hook for the hours that we're billing and the work that we're producing, I think it can be a little bit intimidating for a lot of people. Has it been intimidating for you?
I think I found it quite not difficult. When you start out, you have to fill out your timesheet and you go, gosh, how many hours did I spend on this? Or, oh, that I spent too many hours on that. That's something I really need to improve on. But you do get used to it quite quickly. You realise that, especially if you're on quite a few different projects, that at the end of the day, they're just trying to not waste it. Well, not waste. They don't want to spend all this money to have this one little solution. So it's not a battle. We're all within the same company and we all are striving for the same goal. But you want to be mindful that I work 7.5 hours in a day. What can I do in that day? And I start the day at 8:30 and I see what I need to do and think, how long do I think this is going to take me? There's a bit of flexibility of, okay, well, if this goes wrong, which is often the case if I'm working with Pro or Survey 123, if anything crashes, but you very quickly get in the mindset of, okay, I've spent several hours on this. Let me now go and work on this. Or, okay, it's the end of the week. I have some goals and some GPS and personal development I need to do. I've assigned this time. Let me give that to myself. Let's not work until late at night and start work super, super early. You have the hours in the day and it's doable. And hopefully with time management, that's something you pick up rather quickly, because if you don't, it's a conversation I'm sure you'll have with a line manager.
Sophie, I've really enjoyed the conversation. I think that your enthusiasm, it's infectious. You can tell that you're a person who's thought about this, enjoys their work and sees a lot of future here. Just to sort of round off the conversation here a little bit, is there anything that you think in terms of geospatial and your career that is the most exciting for you right now?
At the moment, I think I'm still in the early stages of thinking, I want to try everything. My GIS life started with remote sensing. That's something I want to come back to. I'm really quite driven to incorporate sustainability and work on projects that have that as a important priority within the project. So that's something I really want to get more involved with. And I think having a year and a half, I don't, people say, I've got a 10-year plan. I have probably a couple of years plan. I know what I'm striving for now, whether that will be the same in 5 years time, but I know that the next steps, what do I need to do to get there? And it's not necessarily moving upwards all the time. You can expand. I'm hopefully going to be working with some initiatives internally and with the local community, and it's working out how can I enjoy this and make it as beneficial to me and the company as possible.
Sophie, thank you very much for your time. Again, I've really enjoyed talking with you, and I wish you all the best with your career. I'm sure it's going to be a brilliant one. But before I let you go, would you mind letting the listeners know where they can go if they want to reach out to you and perhaps ask you some questions or connect with you?
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you for your time as well. So I'm on LinkedIn, Sophie Willett, which is WILLETT, and I do have a Twitter page. It's at Soph Willett _. It's something that I'm really trying to push myself to use a bit more. I'm part of a social media campaign with the Early Careers Network, so we use that as well. So I'd say to anyone who's looking to get into geospatial to have a look at the AGI's Early Careers Network page and Twitter page. And I think LinkedIn and Twitter can be some fantastic tools, so feel free to drop me a DM or drop me a message and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions anyone has, really.
Thanks again, Sophie.
Brilliant. Thank you, Daniel.
Once again, a huge thank you to my sponsor, safegraph.com. So these guys do an incredible job of curating points of interest for the UK, the US and Canada, and they do a ton of work for the community in general. They are one of the founding partners behind the PlaceKey initiative, which is worth checking out if you haven't heard of it before. And also they have built this thing called the Data Consortium, where they've built a community around academics working on their data. So they give free access to academics and a lot of support as well, which I think is absolutely brilliant. So if you're in the market for points of interest data, check out safegraph.com. I'll put a link in the show notes to make it a bit easier to find, and just realize that by supporting SafeGraph, you're also supporting all of the great work that they're doing for the geospatial community at large. I really hope you enjoyed that episode. That was Sophie Willett. I will put a link to her LinkedIn account in the show notes so you can connect with her there if you want. So there was a couple of things that really impressed me about Sophie. The first one was that how proactive she is. Here's a person who's really taking responsibility for their own learning and for their own progression, and that it's a positive proactivity as well. It's not you never get the feeling when you're talking to her that this is something she's been forced to do. This is something she wants to do. She's driven by curiosity, and she wants to learn these skills. And she's not waiting for somebody to come along and say, hey, it's your time now. She's not waiting to be picked. She's picking herself. And she's doing that by introducing people to GIS, telling the story, by working as an ambassador for herself, for her skills, and what GIS can do for the people on the other side of the table. At no point during the conversation did Sophie refer to herself as being an expert, but I am sure that she understands that she's expert enough to meet the expectations, to solve the problems, not to perfection, but in a way that's good enough, in a way that meets spec. She's also expert enough to provide things that the project wasn't necessarily asking for. And she talked about using Python to automate processes, and how this, like her skills learned on one project, could benefit another project. She's expert enough to see the overlap there, and she's expert enough to make the time to experiment. And this is one of the big pieces of advice that John Nielsen gave us in the episode about communicating with maps. And his advice to young professionals was to make that time to experiment. To ask yourself the question, like, is there another way? What would happen if? So I'm sure you can see the tension here, the tension between doing what we are being paid to do and running these small experiments. And one thing that really helps me to understand whether this is something worth trying are these three questions. And they are, who is it for? What is it for? And if it fails, do I get to try again? And I think once you've answered those three questions, you'll have a really good understanding whether this is something that you should be experimenting with. And that's it for another episode of the Mapscaping Podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in again this week. It's much appreciated. As always, you're more than welcome to reach out to me on social media. You can find me at Mapscaping on Twitter, and just search for host of Mapscaping Podcast on LinkedIn, and I'll show up. I would love to connect with you there. If email is your thing, you are more than welcome to reach out to me on info@mapscaping.com. And if you don't want to reach out to me at all, well, that's perfectly fine too. I'll be back again next week with another podcast episode. I hope that you'll take the time to listen. Okay, talk soon. Bye.